Uh-oh.
Okay, I'm going to call this meeting to order, first with a motion because it's a special meeting of council. The Council of the Corporation of the Township of Seguin does hereby convene this special meeting of council at 9:59 a.m. in order to consider the following matters. Municipal Service Delivery Review, it's the interim council presentation, the recruitment for the position of Chief Administrative Officer, and the correspondence from Weeks Construction, Inc. regarding contract number 2020-013, granular for Turtle Lake Road. Can I have a motion from Ward 1?
I so move.
Thank you. And seconded by Ward 2.
I'll second that.
Thank you. All in favor?
I have something to say, Mayor.
Okay, it's discussion. Okay, there's no vote yet, please. Okay, Councillor Collins?
Yes, I would like a quick discussion on the Orville Housing Project added to the agenda. Everyone has received a copy of the email from Craig. And I've also spoke this morning to Steve Stone, who is okay with this as well.
I guess you all should have also received my indication that I was uncomfortable with it because we didn't have enough background or a staff report on it yet. Is there any further discussion on adding something to this, to the agenda? We have no background information other than Ted's email.
Oh, yeah, no, I got to put my hand up, right?
Yep, okay. Councillor Fellner, yep, you wish to speak to it?
Yeah, I think on the face of this, this is pretty simple. It's the 9th condition, and as that condition, the property was to be rezoned. And I'd hate to jeopardize the sale because this is possibly a really nice development for Orville. Fairly simple matter. It isn't going to really, the new purchaser isn't going to be able to do anything with the property until he rezones it anyhow. So that's my opinion. I just don't want to delay this thing and lose this potential opportunity for this development. That's my thought.
I did suggest that there could be a real estate delay until after our council meeting and until after we could receive a staff report. Director Stone, do you have anything to add on this?
Hi, Council.
Yep.
Hi, Steve.
Council has the authority, because they're the approval authority here, to waive any conditions. Conditions if they are waived, have to be notified to the public. So if it happens today, if it happens at the council meeting on July 6th, the challenge for the closing date of June 30th is they'll need an extension in any regard from the landowner who owns the property, because with re-notification, there'll be another appeal period of 20 days. So we can't stamp deeds until after the appeal period is finished. So I've already spoken to the agent, Mr. O'Brien, with regards to that, and indicated that to him sort of the process that could unfold if council wishes to go that direction, but it does. They run up against the fact that their closing date is June 30th, and there won't be any deeds available for the conveyance of land at that point. So,
okay, so as I understand it, regardless of what we do today or on the 6th, there's a 20-day waiting period, so an extension will be needed. Is that how you're summarizing?
Yeah, so the property, the sale and purchase agreement of the piece of property that they want to get to develop, there's 2 pieces, won't be available by June 30th.
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Councillor Collins, in future, could everybody please use their little blue hands?
Yes. Can you see my little blue hand?
My
Yeah, I
little
can.
hands up.
Okay.
Yep, Collins. And I see yours, Rod.
All this does.
Mine's up too.
All this basically does, Mayor, is expedite the process There is a closing on the rezoning to be complete by August the 27th. So if we waive condition number 7, the process starts today, not 2 weeks from now. And it basically, if you read what's there, that the developer will complete the rezoning, and it just expedites everything, and it's in the developer's hands, and the deed closes. He owns the property, and it's just a simple process, basically, and it just moves it ahead quicker, and it helps everybody in the long run.
Councillor Vincent has the floor.
I just wanted to say that I have to leave at a certain time. I have an appointment, so I won't be able to stay to deal with another matter. I really don't know anything about it other than what I've heard, and I personally don't want to rush anything. And if we can deal with it at next meeting, that would be okay, so we have a chance to get ourselves up to speed. I don't feel comfortable doing it today. That's all.
Thank you. Councillor Osborne.
So, Ted, did the real estate developer not realize this when making this close date, that the rezoning was one of the conditions, or did they mess up?
Absolutely.
Well, why would they make the close for June 30th when we hadn't done the rezoning? That's question one. Question two, if we do have to wait for the rezoning to take place in order to bless this, as Steve mentioned, there's a 20-day waiting period. I guess the only way out is to waive that condition, let the sale proceed without rezoning, and then they can go ahead. Although, is the vendor and purchaser comfortable that this would be a closed sale without the proper rezoning done in advance? Because if it didn't get rezoned, that could affect the deal in the long run. And that's one concern legally here. We could get into another fiasco.
Rod, did you read the email?
Yes.
Okay,
I'm saying, what I'm suggesting is the real estate company is screwed up here, since they've knowing full well, okay, messed up, pardon my French. I'm not sure what's allowed in Canadian politics. So the real estate must have messed up, knowing full well by setting the close date before the rezoning, the final condition was established, that they were just looking for a problem.
Rod,
Why wouldn't they wait until such time as the rezoning date was confirmed before they would set a close date? I guess that's my only the only problem I have with it. Otherwise, I don't have a problem.
Okay, Councillor Collins, last comment on adding this to the agenda.
yes, to Councillor Osborne's questions. In the second paragraph, Rod, you'll see it's the Baileys. They are requesting the council to direct planning to allow the property to be purchased by an offer.
I understand that. I knew
Yeah.
that.
So in other words, there is no legalities here. We're doing nothing illegal here. We're just waiving condition number 7, and
Okay.
and this will be taken up by the owner, by the developer now, because he cannot build until it has been rezoned. So we're just
Okay,
expediting
exactly my question.
what we're doing.
Mayor, if I may,
One
One
more
more
question
response.
from Councillor Osborne, and
my
then we can call it
question
off.
is, if the risk here is, if for some reason, and I doubt it would happen, that the rezoning does not take place, then the deal would be in dispute, because it is a condition of the deal. Technically speaking, if it doesn't get rezoned now and doesn't get rezoned later, they could lose the deal. Am I correct, Ted?
That's right. So that's why they want to close it on the 30th.
They want us
Okay.
to waive it to bypass that condition. Okay,
Yeah,
Steve,
there are
we
risks.
in
There's
any
no
legal?
question. We've got a motion on the floor to add an item to the addendum. In order to pass, it needs 2/3 of the council. All in favor of adding the addendum, which would waive the condition? You're in favor, Councillor Osborne, of
We'll discuss
adding?
it. We're not making a decision, we're putting it on the agenda, correct?
That's
Okay.
correct.
We're only putting it on the agenda.
Yes,
We're not
Rob.
voting on yes or no to waive.
Okay, Councillor Collins. Councillor Osborne has the floor.
So we're only adding it to the agenda at this point.
Fine.
Correct?
Okay, it's added to the agenda but does not make a decision. The addendum, sorry.
Well, no.
Councillor Collins, I'm talking to the clerk.
Yell.
So the question I have is actually for Steve. My understanding is what's the process though? Like what does it require a resolution of council? What would happen?
Director Stone, did you hear the question?
Tell that again. And I mean it.
Director Stone, did you hear the question from the clerk?
No, could he repeat it, please?
So would we just need a resolution that would waive, everybody's saying it's condition number 7 of the consent?
Well, I'm going to suggest that maybe more conditions, but that.
Okay, so we'll wait till we get to the discussion then. I was just going to prepare ahead of time. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so all we're doing at this point is adding it as a discussion item to the addendum, following the Hall's issue. And that's all in favor? So they got their 5. Now we have to add it here, correct?
Yeah.
You'll do it? Should I put Gary?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So this is a special meeting to review both our municipal service delivery and the kickoff of the search committee. We've added 2 business items which will follow those items. So right now I'd like to welcome Oscar Poloni from KPMG, who will take us through his presentation, which, are you going to put it on the screen, Oscar?
Your worship, I will. I need to be allowed to do so by the host.
Okay, we all have it in our agenda package as well. The clerk is working on that.
They've got it in their package.
Everybody has it in their package, so I think what we should do is just proceed. Just tell us what slide you're on as you're speaking. Senior staff is also participating in this meeting.
Fair enough. So, your worship,
Mayor,
Councillor Fellner, yes?
yeah, item 3, disclosure.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. I did skip. Sorry, Oscar. Disclosure of pecuniary interest in general nature thereof.
Yes, yeah.
Councillor Fellner, sorry.
I wish to declare I may have a conflict of interest, pecuniary interest related to the following matter. Council meeting agenda item 5.c, Weeks Construction Inc., contract number 2020-013 granular for Turtle Lake Road, as the contract has been awarded to my employer.
Hey, thank you very much. Sorry. Okay,
Quite all right.
I turn it back over to Oscar. Sorry about that, Oscar. Go ahead. You have the floor.
so your worship, members of council, good morning. Thank you very much for allowing us the opportunity to be here today to provide council. I'm going to apologize, your worship. I actually have guys doing work outside, and I don't know if you can hear that. I'm going to go tell them to stop. So if you give me 2 seconds, I'll be right back.
Yes.
Okay. We have dogs, we have kids, we have lawnmowers, we have all kinds of things at council meetings now.
Greg, it's Rod here. I got a problem with my screen here. I got a little screen says Seguin, but I can't open it up. I don't know what, I'm hitting Zoom and it's not opening.
We can see you.
Yeah, but I can't see anything. All I see is Seguin Township. I've got a technical problem.
Do you have, are you on a computer, Rod, or on an iPad?
I'm on a computer. No, I don't use iPad. I use a
Okay, then go to the upper right-hand corner and choose gallery view instead of speaker view.
No, I don't even have that. All I got is a small screen saying Seguin Township, and whoever the speaker is shows up, and that's it. I have no
Okay.
tools.
Well, go to the
Zoom
top
at the
right.
bottom, nothing there.
I think you
Unless-
should be able to
okay,
go to the
top right.
top right where it says speaker view. Click on that and it should
No.
change to
No,
gallery
there is
view.
I minimized. There is no speaker view. There are no tools for Zoom up there. All I got is hide video, mute audio, stop video, and exit minimized. Ah, there we go. I guess I minimized.
Okay, and now can you go up to gallery view?
Just a minute. Yeah, I'm back.
So,
Now I'm back. Hold on. There we go.
okay, so Oscar's gonna
Okay.
share.
Oscar
I'm
is
good
now
now.
sharing his PowerPoint presentation. Can everyone see it?
You got rid of the contractor?
Yep.
I told
Can you see
Yeah.
page 1 of the service delivery
PowerPoint.
review?
Yes.
PowerPoint is up. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Oscar.
So, Your Worship, Council, my apologies. I have squirrels in my house. So I've got people coming to squirrel proof my house. And unfortunately, at the moment you invited me, they decided they were going to start to drill holes. So I've put them on hold. My apologies for that. So wanted to have an interim presentation to council with respect to the service review. And one of the things that our experience has demonstrated through these processes is we like to be able to touch base with council as we're moving through the process, just to talk about what we're doing and what we're finding. Admittedly, because of the pandemic, there's still a chunk of work that we haven't done yet that will drive a lot of it. But in my discussions with the acting CAO, I felt it was good to come in front of council to give you a bit of an update as to where we are. So with respect to the review and the progress of the review, there's a number of different components that we had identified earlier in our presentation, our introductory presentation to council. The first component relates to the inventory of municipal services. And these are documents that we prepare that talk about the services you provide, the rationale for your delivery, what your service level standard is, and how does that compare to other municipalities, and what are your resource requirements, both in terms of staff and dollar values. We have developed 20 individual profiles that document the services that are provided by the township. We're currently on the 3rd version of these service profiles, which we're going to release to your staff for their review and validation. So that is well in hand. The second component, and probably the most important component of the review, is the concept of process mapping. And we'll talk a little bit about this later in the presentation. But what it does is it looks at your processes to try to find operating efficiencies, try to find customer service enhancements, and other opportunities for improvements. Because of the pandemic, we haven't been able to start these yet, but we have had discussions with Ms. Fraser, and we are going to be on site in July, specifically to complete the process mapping to look at the opportunities. The third component, which is the other major component, relates to a comparative analysis. And this is looking at certain metrics and certain indicators for Seguin and comparing them against other municipalities. And really the intention of this is to get some sense as to where do you sit as an outlier, because if your costs of service or if your staffing is high, we then look at the potential from an opportunities perspective as to how do you dial that back. The comparative analysis has been completed. What I will say is this, is based on the conversations that we initially had with council, it became very aware to us that we needed to make sure that we had very good data and a data-driven analysis to support any conclusions. So what we've done is we've actually expanded the jurisdictional group that we're using for the purposes of the comparison. Initially, when we presented to council, we had 6 municipalities that were identified. We've added another 3. So we've added Northeastern Manitoulin and the Islands. We've added the Township of Georgian Bay just south of you. And then we added Highlands East and Haliburton County as well. And once again, the reason for adding more municipalities is to make sure that we had a sufficiently large comparator base to be able to say, yes, what we're seeing in Seguin and how we're seeing you compare to other municipalities makes sense. The other thing that we've done is for certain indicators, we've actually done a secondary analysis that pulls in all of the municipalities in the Parry Sound District. Now, council, as you can appreciate, all municipalities are different in terms of their economic circumstances, in terms of their demographics, in terms of households and services that they provide. And I recognize that there's no perfect comparator for Seguin. The reality is there's very few perfect comparators for anybody, but we wanted to do the analysis on an expanded base to be able to get some sense as to how you actually fare. And the comparative analysis feeds a lot of what we're about to discuss today. We are going to be looking at enterprise risk management strategies, and this is to look at potential risk exposures that you have at the corporate level. Where are the gaps and how can you close them? So for example, things around cybersecurity, things around financial sustainability. How are you set as a municipality to actually address these and to deal with these? So that will come in July as well. And then the last point relates to the opportunity identification, validation, and prioritization. And as we discussed at the initial presentation, we're going to come up with a number of different opportunities throughout this process. We need to make sure that they make sense. And one of the things that we noted from our conversations with council was a lot of what we were talking about potentially proposing, council was okay hearing the messages as long as it was substantiated by a sufficiently supportable business case, if you will. So it's not just the case of toss out opportunities, but toss out opportunities and discuss the rationale. And what we've heard consistently from the councillors was, as long as we can provide that, you would be opening to having considerations on a range of different things. So we are already starting to identify opportunities. Every stage that you go through, you formulate these. As we move through the process, we expect that we'll be validating next month. And so what we'll really be in is by the beginning of August, we'll be in a position where we'll be probably 90% done the service review. So whenever we do reviews such as this, we always like to talk about key themes. And these are major findings that come out of the review. And I can appreciate council that in some respect, these are self-evident. So if you'll indulge me, the first thing that we found is that from a service perspective, there's very few services that we have identified that we would consider to be discretionary in nature. And what we've shown on the slide 4 is the breakdown of services based on 4 different categories. Which ones are mandatory and are required to be delivered by legislation or regulation? Which ones are essential? So basically required for the purposes of operating the municipality or protecting property and persons in the municipality. Those that are traditional, which are discretionary services that you will find often delivered in other municipalities, and which ones are non-traditional or purely discretionary. And so what you will find is that roughly 75% of what you deliver from a spending perspective is actually in that mandatory or essential category. This would include things like roads. This would include things like solid waste. This would include aspects of the municipality for the administration. So for example, the Municipal Act requires you to have a treasurer. The Municipal Act requires you to have a clerk. Your traditional services are in line with your community services. So the operation of your recreational facility, the operation of various parks, for example. These are not required by legislation, but any municipality of your size and sophistication will deliver them. From a discretionary perspective, what you'll find is the spend is actually quite low. There's some programs from an environmental focus perspective that are discretionary that go beyond what we typically find municipalities doing. And from a implications perspective with respect to the review, oftentimes what you'll find service reviews will do is they'll talk about cutting services. And there was an article in the newspaper yesterday about the city of Thunder Bay undertaking a service review where they were talking about closing down a ball field. What you'll find is that where you have a heavy weighting towards mandatory and essential services, your ability to reduce costs comes down accordingly. Now, that said, just because you have to do something doesn't mean you can't deliver it in a more efficient or a better way, for lack of a better term. So it doesn't take opportunities off of the table. What it will find, however, is that your ability to do wholesale service level reductions is less dramatic than if you had other larger municipalities with a whole host of services. What you'll also find is that in certain cases, the services are not the only thing that's prescribed by legislation. Service levels are prescribed as well. So if you think about roads maintenance, for example, where the province has established maintenance standards for roads, you're responsible to abide by those. That said, once again, just because you have to do something doesn't mean you can't do it differently, and doesn't mean you can't do it better, and doesn't mean you can't do it cheaper. And I don't think this is a surprise to anybody. I know when we went through our interviews with council and we talked about the services that were delivered, there was a strong recognition on the part of council that the township doesn't deliver a lot of services. And the ones that they do deliver, for the most part, are mandatory in nature. We also didn't get a lot of feedback from council with respect to a desire for service cuts. And so, once again, I can appreciate this is self-evident, but I just wanted to talk about what the profiles and what the data analysis is demonstrating. The second theme that we've found is that your operating costs, generally speaking, in comparison to the peer municipalities, really are comparable. And I can appreciate that there's fluctuations across the board, but what you can see on slide 5 is your road costs per lane kilometer. So this is the cost of maintaining the municipal road network. And in order to denominate it, we divide it by the number of lane kilometers in the network. So 1 kilometer of 2-lane road is 2 lane kilometers. What you'll find is that the reason why you do that is because it establishes, or it helps to set the difference between very large municipalities and very small municipalities. And as you can see from the analysis, your road costs per lane kilometer are generally in the middle of the pack. We're not necessarily surprised that Perry Sound has a higher cost per lane kilometer, because urban road networks oftentimes are more expensive to maintain than rural road networks. The other thing that we've looked at, and on the right-hand side of the slide, is we've shown your administrative costs per household. And this is the cost of your CAO function, your finance function, your clerk function. We denominate this on a per household basis because it gives us some sense as to the relevant sizes of municipalities. And as you can see from the graph, once again, Seguin's costs are towards the middle of the pack. So we're not seeing any examples where we would consider Seguin to be an outlier. If you were very, very high in comparison to the peer group, we would naturally target those areas to try to say, why are you high and how do we get your costs down?
Oscar, can I interrupt you for a minute? I see that we have a question coming in from one of the counselors.
Yep.
And I'm wondering if that's okay to have questions as you go through the slides.
Happy to have that conversation.
Okay, Councillor Moffat, you have a question.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Mayor. Oscar, in terms of the slide on the road costs, is noted by the title, it says operating costs. Given that, how does the capital related to roads, do we have I didn't see a slide on that information. So how does that play into, is there a different analysis or a different comparative, or how does that work?
Through you, your worship, what you'll find, Councillor Moffat, is oftentimes road costing will be contingent on the relative wealth of the municipality, for lack of a better term. And what I mean, quite frankly, Councillor Moffat, is those that have money spend it, those that don't. There is a separate analysis with respect to capital. There's actually 2 analyses with respect to capital. One talks about service levels of roads, so percentage of gravel versus paved. Also the condition indexes for roads, to talk about which are considered to be good versus very good versus those that are poor and very poor. And that would give you some sense as to whether you're making sustainable investments into it. The other point of analysis, Councillor, and this is something that we'll be talking about a little later on, is the approach that municipalities take with respect to the delivery of capital. So in some cases, municipalities will do some aspects of capital projects using internal resources, whereas other municipalities will use external forces for those same approaches. And what you'll find is that will drive a number of different things, including the cost of capital projects. So we are looking at capital, Councillor. We're looking at from the perspective of how do you deliver capital and what is the level of investment and what is the level of your infrastructure standard. We haven't really finalized that analysis yet, Council. So if you'll indulge me, we're not prepared to talk about it at this point, because part of what we need to do is we need to actually go through the process mapping approach for the Township of Seguin to say, how do you identify a capital project? How do you procure a capital project? How do you deliver a capital project? And then how do you monitor in the post-delivery period? That will come out of the process mapping that we're hoping to accommodate in July. So Councillor Moffat, to your point, we are looking at it. We're just not there yet.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. So the other thing that we've looked at is from the operating cost perspective, we've actually looked at all operating costs. So this includes all of the services that the municipality delivers. We've backed out amortization, which is the depreciation of your capital assets. And once again, the reason why we've taken that out is because we're looking at capital separate from operations. What you will find is that in comparison to your peer groups, Seguin really is, from an operating cost perspective, in the middle of the pack. What you'll find, though, is that the municipalities that are highlighted in red are actually lower tier municipalities. And so because of that, there's a cost of services that are delivered by the upper tier that aren't reflected in these numbers. So to give you the example, in Dysart, which is a lower tier municipality in the county of Haliburton, land ambulance services are delivered by the county. So Dysart doesn't have an expense for land ambulance service. So technically, if I'm a resident of Dysart, my costs are higher than what's indicated here because I have the county costs associated with it. And once again, Council, the reason why we wanted to do this is we wanted to get some perspective as to where your operating costs are as a percent in comparison to the peer grouping, to try to get some sense as to whether you're hanging high or are you low. And I think what you'll find is in a number of instances, the reason why your costs are low may reflect operating efficiencies, but the reality is the reason why they may be low is because you just don't deliver the same level of services. So no garbage collection, you're using transfer station, no water, wastewater services. And so because of that, it's important to recognize this tells us the what, it doesn't necessarily tell us the why. And while this is a good indicator, because if you were on the high end, we'd have to have a discussion as to why, the reality is we still need to tease this out to differentiate where your position is affected by operating efficiencies versus where your position is operated by services and service levels. And that analysis continues to be in development. What you will find, and one of the things that some of the council members on the call will recall, is when we were talking about the services and the facilities and everything that you have, one of the things that we talked about was the legacy of amalgamation. And in certain cases, what you will find is that legacy continues to come forward and to impact on service levels and resources. So to give you an example, for a municipality of your size, your library service is actually overbuilt. And so when we look at library services, there's two metrics that we use. One is the number of workstations per resident or per 10,000 residents. And the second is the number of service points per resident. And what you'll find is that in terms of internet workstations, you're the third highest of the peer group. In terms of service points, you're the second highest of the peer group. And the factor that we attribute this to is the fact that you have more library access than a municipality of your size, partly because as amalgamation has come through, you've maintained these sites. And what you'll find, though, interesting is not only are you on the high end with respect to library service indicators, you're actually on the low end for library costs. So what you'll find is that on a cost per household basis, your costs are actually the lowest of the comparator group. despite the fact that your services and your service levels for libraries are actually overbuilt. So it's an interesting dichotomy because typically where you have higher service levels, we would expect your costs to be higher. And from an opportunity perspective, we would say you should potentially cut. What we're finding here is there's no real benefit to cut because at the end of the day, your costs are already the lowest. And as we've discussed with some of the counselors during the interview, the library costs you $100,000 a year. So to make a 10% reduction is $10,000. And that then gets into the question as to, from a political perspective and from a service perspective, is it actually worth it to make that cut? Or are you willing to just absorb the fact that higher service level, lower cost? And the reality is this is a measure of one measure of service level standard. The reason why your costs are low is because from a full-time staffing perspective, you're lower than your peer group as well.
Mayor, may I?
Yep, Councillor Osborne, you have a question?
Yes, while we're on libraries, there is a disconnect there, Oscar, as you pointed out. The fact that we have 4 library branches, however, our costs per household are lower on the scale. And I think much of that is attributed to the rate of compensation for our library workers. We have some of the lowest paid library workers in the area per employee. So I believe that is what is causing our costs to be low when our service is high. However, having been on the library board, I wonder whether that level of compensation for our staff to keep these levels is sustained. I think we have to have a close look at turnover within our library staff due to low compensation to maintain that low cost of service. At the same time, don't have a lot of turnover. Thank you.
One of the things that we have done, Council, is we are looking at number of staff, and we'll be talking about it in the closed session presentation. So that analysis is there. We've also started to look at compensation levels as well. And so because of that, we can talk about the respective compensation positional to your peer group as well. So the fourth point that we wanted to identify is that it's important to recognize that, sorry, if I may go back. If I did something similar from a service level perspective for fire, I would get the same analysis as I got with respect to library. And what you will find is that for a municipality of your number of population and household, compared to your peer group, your fire service is overbuilt. And I can appreciate that there's a very big geographic area that needs to be covered. But at the end of the day, some of these stations are legacies of the amalgamation. And the reality is, and you know, we can discuss this later in the presentation, if you rebuilt the municipality, you may not necessarily put the stations where they are today. Now, once again, similar to library, what you'll find is that your fire costs actually compare quite well. And partly is because you have a volunteer service. And so because of that, there isn't that heavy component associated with it. So the fourth key theme that we want to talk about, and it's the importance to understand the context of the environment that you deliver municipal services in, is that in some cases, the service levels and the resources are influenced by differences in the demand pattern. What you will find in the analysis is that your investment in planning and your investment in building services on a per household basis is actually higher than your comparator group. And what that would potentially lead you to the conclusion is that planning and building inspection is overbuilt. And that is something that when we initially did the analysis, we looked at it on a per household basis and we went, seems a little high. But the real measure of measuring your level of activity and resources for planning and building is really the level of development activity. And so what we did was we indicated on slide 8 the level of building permit activity, both in terms of the number of permits that are issued and the value of the building permits that are issued. What you will find is that the level of activity in Seguin significantly higher than what's going on in the Parry Sound district. And what you will find is that the value of the permits that are being issued are the second highest of the comparator group. And so what that means is, while you may have a municipality that has the same number of households as you do, and you would say on a per household basis, I've got too much invested in planning and too much invested in building. If you're developing $40 million a year of building permit activity and another municipality is developing 10, what that means naturally is you need more resources because the level of activity is higher. And so once again, this is more than anything else just to be able to say there are differences with respect to the pattern of demand that will drive different levels of investment. When you look at parks and recreation, when you look at library, when you look at fire services, it's more often than not a question of the number of households you have, because those are geared towards the municipality that you serve and the residents that you serve. So it's just important, once again, this is how we differentiate between what the benchmarking tells us and why Seguin sits where it sits. So just a bit of key themes from the jurisdictional analysis. And once again, despite where you're sitting from an indicator perspective and the fact that you're comparable with other municipalities, there are opportunities that we're already starting to identify to change. And I've always heard the saying, there's nothing so perfect it cannot be improved. The real measure, though, of where we believe most of the opportunities are going to come from is with respect to the process map. And the process mapping helps us to break down your activities and specifically to look for 8 different types of inefficiencies, or what people will call waste. So part of what this will be, for example, is, and we've listed them on slide 9, for example, the last one for extra processing. This is the question of saying, are you doing more work than what is required in order to deliver municipal service? And I remember a municipality, and I will apologize if I've said this already, where they would process payroll, and then they would recalculate it in Excel because they didn't trust their computer system. And that basically was one full-time job in the municipality. So those are the types of waste or the types of inefficiencies that we're looking for. In addition, the concept of what we call defects, or these are preventable errors that impact your services, but also impact on customer service. Because if you can imagine coming in to apply for something and you have to do it 3 or 4 times, there's a customer service frustration there as well. And I'm not saying, council, that that happens today. I'm not saying that that's a significant issue for the township. But one of the things that we'll do when we do the business process analysis or the process mapping is to try to find where these inefficiencies lay.
Oscar, can I interrupt for a second? Because we have a question from Councillor Osborne.
Sure.
Councillor Osborne?
Just a comment, is anyone else getting an echo from speakers? I'm getting an echo.
I am.
A huge amount of feedback.
Maybe the clerk could identify where that's coming from. It's annoying.
We don't hear it. Make sure if you have a cell phone or an iPad or anything in the room that you are not using, it needs to be completely turned off.
No, nothing else. Who else is experiencing an echo?
So your worship,
I am.
Yeah.
the mic,
So there's a definite echo that we don't normally get in Zoom. Greg, can you identify
Oscar,
the problem?
do you have a solution, Oscar?
the mic for Seguin Township is on.
That
So
would
that
be
could be muted.
the speakerphone.
It's our
Turn the
speaker,
speakerphone mic on.
but it's not our mic.
Well, there is an echo.
Okay, I apologize. We'll see what we can do at this end.
Yep.
Thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Yeah, it's just a little bit annoying. It's hard to listen to things.
Okay, our apologies.
Yeah,
Keep
your
going.
worship, Your worship, one of the things I've discovered from Zoom is that if you're talking, your box is highlighted and the Seguin Township box is actually highlighted. So I don't know if that's where the feedback's coming from.
We'll check it. You're not-
Seguin Township box is the council chambers, when the mayor speaks, when we speak, that's the one.
So just to indicate to council what the process mapping looks like, this is an example of a building permit process map for another municipality that we've identified. And once again, it breaks it down through the process to try to get some sense as to what the individual steps are. And when you have the individual steps, what you then ask yourself the question is, what's the cost of delivering this process versus the value? Are we as efficient as we can be? How does this impact on the customer? How does documents move? Can you use technology? That type of stuff. So just to give council an insight into what a business process map looks like for building permits, and there's a number of services that we want to flag. This is what we'll be doing in July. And what we expect is where we find efficiencies or operating effectiveness, internal control measurements, or customer service enhancements, it's going to come out of this type of analysis. So what it's also going to include is a time analysis. And this talks about the staff utilization versus capacity. What does peak service look like versus off-peak services? So if you can imagine, building processes are busier in the summertime generally than they are in the winter time. It's also going to look at performance against key performance indicators and legislative requirements. So one of the things that you'll find in the service profile is we're tracking KPI. And what we're doing is we're looking at what are the measures that talk about what's the level that the township strives to deliver services at, and what is it actually delivering services at, and how does that get improved? So once again, the process mapping is going to happen in July. It's going to drive a number of findings because there's always stuff that we find. I don't know, council, to be honest with you, what the outcome is going to be. I would just be surprised if we didn't find any. So from an opportunities perspective, as we've discussed, we're already starting to formulate the list. There are some opportunities that we believe have higher potential and some that have lower potential. So changes to how you deliver services and process changes is always something that we believe is high opportunity. There's a number of services that we believe may lend themselves to shared service arrangements with other municipalities. The caution that we have here, and we're cognizant of this, is Seguin has a very high level of taxable assessment compared to other municipalities. So entering into a shared service arrangement, while it may be beneficial from a customer service and efficiency perspective, could result in you funding a higher proportion of the cost. So you need to be careful about what those arrangements look like. The concept of user fee versus tax subsidy is something we always look at in the review, and there's stuff here that we found with respect to solid waste, for example, with respect to parks and recreation. And also within the municipality, it's the alignment of who does what. And so what we find when we look at your service profile and we look at the services and the org structure, there's some questions as to why the services that are being delivered sit where they sit. And so one of the things that we need to explore when we talk about the processes and finalize and validate the opportunities are potential changes with respect to your organizational structure, specifically to make things more efficient, to ensure that same or similar services are grouped together, to make sure that you don't have different parts of the municipality delivering service, and to make sure that you're maximizing economies of scale as much as possible. There are some opportunities that we've identified, but we believe will likely have lower potential. So the concept of eliminating services, as I've discussed, there aren't a lot of discretionary services. There are some, but these are not going to save you $1 million. In addition, we talked about the library and how it's overbuilt, and fire services, and how it's overbuilt. We don't necessarily believe that facility rationalization is going to be a big driver of the opportunities in the service review. We'll flag it and we'll talk about it, but what we're likely going to find is, from a service perspective, based on what we've heard from council and based on how the costs compare, we're not necessarily sure they're going to rise to the top of the list from a priority perspective. So with respect to next steps, council, we are going to be working with your teams to finalize the service profiles. We're going to be working with your team to develop the process maps. And as we've discussed, we've already had conversations with Ms. Fraser about coming up in July, after the Canada Day holiday, to complete these. We do want to look at the validating the opportunities and prioritizing them, and then coming back to council with a report. We expect service profiles, process maps, and opportunities basically to be done by the end of July. And what we would then do is we would spend August working on the final report and the presentation to council. And then what that will allow us to do is to be in front of council in September, basically with our findings and with our analysis and our suggestions as to what you may want to consider rolling into the 2021 budget. So, Your Worship, members of council, a brief presentation of the service review, what we've done, what we're going to do, and where we are. If there are any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them at this time.
Thank you very much, Oscar. Councillors, do you have any questions for Oscar before we move into the closed portion of the presentation? I'm sorry. Councillor Cole.
Yeah, Oscar, thanks for your presentation. It was great. One question I had about how you chose the municipal comparisons. When I look at Perry Sound as an example, which has a whole different set of operating circumstances, such as water, sewage. I guess those are the two basic ones where most of us operate on septic systems that don't provide water. Is it fair to compare those kinds of municipalities?
No. So through you, Your Worship, we select municipalities based on a couple of different things. We're looking for same or similar number of households, and we're also looking for those that are seasonal in nature. So have a high percentage of seasonal residents versus full-time residents. And what you'll note, Councillor Cole, from the presentation that we have here, our core comparator group are 9 municipalities. And the reason why Perry Sound shows up in the numbers isn't because they're part of the core group, but because they're part of the secondary analysis of the Perry Sound district. And I would suggest, Councillor Cole, to your point, Perry Sound isn't a good comparator, but neither is Nipis. We did it just as a secondary analysis to talk about what's happening in the neighborhood. What you will find, council, is when we do the benchmarking as part of the service profile, the only ones that we speak to are the 9 that are on this list, which excludes Perry Sound. And to your point, Councillor Cole, it's a bad comparator because they do more services than you do: water, wastewater, garbage pickup. They're in because they're part of the secondary analysis for the Perry Sound.
Thank you.
Councillor Osborne. Oh, you need to unmute. Councillor Osborne?
All right. Oscar, what is NEMI again?
Northeastern Manitoulin and the island is the former Little Current.
Thank you.
Further questions? Okay, thank you very, very much, Oscar. I'm just going to turn to the clerk a little bit to ask on process here. Do we go out of open and into closed now?
if there's no more questions on
No.
that, yes.
No more questions? Okay, so staff will be staying for this closed portion. Let me just read a couple of motions here to get us, do I need to read all this? Okay, I have a motion on the floor that the Council of the Corporation of the Township of Seguin does hereby proceed to a closed meeting at 10:53 a.m. in order to address matters pertaining to personal matters about identifiable individuals, including municipal or local board employees, and these come under the Municipal Service Delivery Review and the recruitment for the position of Chief Administrative Officer, and labor relations or employee negotiations. They also come under the Municipal Service Delivery Review and the recruitment for the position of the Chief Administrative Officer, and litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board. And this refers to Weeks Construction, Inc., contract number 2020-013, granular for Turtle Lake Road. Could I have a motion by Ward 3?
So moved.
And
Bill got an echo.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Seconded by Ward 5.
I second it.
Thank you. All in favor of moving into closed? Thank you, and that's carried.
No, just one.
One moment while we sort out technicalities here on recording.
We have to end the YouTube and
We have to end the YouTube, but I think you can